They dumped a trembling German Shepherd puppy like trash, but he refused to give up. Crawling through rain, fear, and city streets, he reached my doorstep, collapsed, and changed everything. What happened next wasn't just about survival. It was a story of trust, love, and a second chance that would heal both of us forever. If you're an animal lover, hit subscribe for more stories like this. It's completely free, and it inspires us to keep telling the ones that truly matter. The night was colder than usual for early autumn. The leaves scattered across the front porch, whispering against the old wooden boards as the wind pushed them back and forth. I had been sitting in my chair by the window, staring into the dark without really seeing it, nursing the silence that had become my constant companion since my wife passed away. The house was too quiet. Always too quiet. I had grown used to it in the way people grow used to pain. It never truly leaves, it just becomes part of you. I thought nothing could pierce that silence anymore. But then came the sound. At first, it was faint. A scraping, almost like something dragging itself against the gravel walkway. I frowned, leaning forward, trying to separate the noise from the wind. Then came a soft, broken whimper. My chest tightened. I rose slowly, every bone in my body heavy with age and grief, and walked to the door. The porch light flickered on as I opened it, casting a pale glow out into the night. That's when I saw him. A tiny German Shepherd puppy, thin as a shadow, crawled toward my doorstep. His legs barely moved, trembling with each desperate push forward. His fur was matted with mud and filth, patches of skin visible where fur should have been. He was shaking violently, his ribs outlined sharply beneath his fragile skin. And then, just as he reached the porch, his head dropped against the wood. His body collapsed, motionless, as though the struggle had finally claimed the last of his strength. I froze. For a moment, I thought he was dead. But then, a shallow breath. A twitch of his ear. A soft, pitiful whine. My heart lurched in my chest. I crouched down, my knees protesting, and reached out a hand. He flinched even in his weakness, pressing his body tighter to the floorboards, as if expecting another blow. That reaction told me everything. Someone had done this to him. I looked out into the street, scanning the shadows as anger began to coil within me. Who would throw away a living creature like trash? Who could look into eyes like his, frightened, pleading, innocent, and still abandon him? But the night was empty. Whoever had left him to die was long gone. I turned my gaze back to the puppy. His eyes barely opened, but when they did, they locked with mine. In those dark, glassy orbs I saw a story written in silence, suffering, betrayal, and a desperate, unspoken plea for mercy. "Easy now," I whispered, my voice cracking from disuse. "You're safe here." My hands, clumsy with hesitation, slid beneath his frail body. He was light, too light. Holding him was like lifting a bundle of bones wrapped in a thin layer of fur. His body was cold to the touch, and he whimpered weakly as I lifted him. I carried him inside, the door clicking shut behind me. The warmth of the living room washed over us, though I wondered if he could even feel it through his weakness. I laid him gently on an old blanket by the fire, quickly stoking the flames to push back the chill. For a long moment, I simply knelt there, staring at him. I had told myself long ago that I wouldn't take in another living soul. Not after losing her. The pain of loss had been too great, and I had convinced myself that caring again would only open that wound wider. And yet here he was. This fragile, broken creature had crawled to my door, as if guided by something I couldn't explain. He hadn't chosen the neighbor's porch or the safety of the woodshed. He had chosen mine. As the fire grew, flickering light danced across the puppy's face. His breathing remained shallow, but his eyes fluttered closed, surrendering to exhausted sleep. I sat back, my throat tight. A storm of feelings clashed within me. Sorrow, anger, fear, and something else I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. I whispered to the quiet room, though the words were really for myself. "You're not trash." Not anymore. And in that moment, I didn't realize how deeply those words would bind me to him, or how much this half-dead puppy would change everything I thought I knew about grief, healing, and the meaning of family. Because sometimes, life doesn't wait for you to be ready. Sometimes it simply shows up at your door, broken and trembling, and asks whether you're willing to pick it up. And on that night, for the first time in years, I did. Morning light filtered weakly through the kitchen curtains. Ben had barely slept, waking every hour at the sound of the puppy shifting in the basket. Each whimper dragged him from dreams of Laura, from memories of a house, once full of warmth and voices. Now, it was just him, the ticking of the old wall clock, and the fragile life resting at his feet. The puppy stirred as Ben poured coffee. Its ribs showed plainly under the blanket, and every movement looked like it cost him strength. Ben hesitated, then crouched, holding out a small dish of warm oatmeal, softened with milk. The smell drew the pup's nose up, tail twitching uncertainly. He sniffed the air, then tried to lift himself. His legs wobbled, giving way, but determination flickered in his eyes. Inch by inch, he dragged himself closer until his tongue touched the edge of the bowl. Ben sat silently, watching him eat with trembling gulps. Something in the sight broke the hardness in his chest. He remembered nights when he himself had sat hunched at the kitchen table, too numb to eat, too lost in grief to care. Yet here was this creature, half dead, clinging fiercely to life. It stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years, the faint, painful stir of hope. After breakfast, Ben wrapped the puppy in a faded towel and lifted him gently. He weighed almost nothing, just a bundle of fur and bones. "All right, boy," Ben muttered, voice rough. "Vet time." The dog's head pressed weakly against his chest, as though he understood. At the small-town clinic, the vet, Dr. Harris, frowned the moment she saw the pup. "German Shepherd mix, maybe 10 weeks old," she said, running her hands gently over the trembling body. "Severely malnourished. Dehydrated." But she smiled faintly, meeting Ben's tired eyes. "He's got fight in him. Most wouldn't have crawled anywhere in this state, let alone to your door." Ben swallowed hard. He wanted to protest, that it wasn't his problem, that he hadn't asked for this, but the words caught in his throat. The dog looked up at him then, with eyes that carried more trust than he deserved. Against all reason, he nodded. "Do what you can. I'll cover the costs." Treatment began. Fluids. Vitamins. A slow feeding plan. The works. Ben waited in the clinic lobby, hands trembling around a paper cup of coffee. He felt strangely responsible, as if the fragile thread of this pup's survival was now tied to his own soul. When Dr. Harris returned, the puppy bundled in a clean blanket, she asked, "Does he have a name?" Ben shook his head. He hadn't thought of one. Naming meant claiming. Naming meant admitting this creature belonged to him. Still, as the pup blinked up with quiet resilience, a word slipped unbidden into Ben's mind. "Charlie." It was simple, familiar, almost ordinary, but it fit. He whispered it once, testing. The pup's ears twitched. Ben felt his chest tighten. "Charlie," he said aloud. And somehow it felt right. The days that followed were slow, filled with careful routines. Feedings every few hours. Medications lined neatly on the counter. Short attempts at walking that left Charlie collapsing back onto his blanket. Each small victory felt monumental. The first time he drank water without help. The first time he pushed himself up on shaky legs. Ben found himself cheering quietly, then stopping, embarrassed at the sound of his own voice filling the silence of the house. And yet, Charlie filled the silence differently. His presence softened edges long hardened by grief. When Ben sat reading in his worn chair, Charlie curled against his feet. When nightmares jolted him awake, he would hear the soft rustle of the pup shifting nearby, as if grounding him. The house no longer felt like a tomb. It felt alive, even if just faintly. But outside the fragile cocoon of their healing, shadows lingered. One evening, as Ben carried Charlie out for fresh air, he noticed something at the edge of the woods behind his house. An empty burlap sack lay torn open, dirt smeared across it. Stenciled letters, faintly read, "Kennel Supply Company." His stomach twisted. Was this where Charlie had come from? Dumped like refuse in the forest? Charlie limped closer, nose twitching. He growled softly, hackles rising, though his body remained weak. Ben crouched, scanning the dark tree-line. A prickle of unease ran through him. Someone had abandoned this puppy deliberately, in a place no one should have survived. But why here? Why his door? Charlie whined, leaning into him. Ben scooped him up, holding him close. He forced a calm tone, though his eyes lingered on the shadows. It's all right, boy. You're safe now. Yet even as he said it, he wasn't sure he believed it. The world outside had taken enough from him already. His wife, his peace, now trying to steal even this fragile chance at healing. That night, as Charlie slept soundly for the first time since his arrival, Ben sat by the window staring into the darkness. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, the house felt different. Ben couldn't explain it, but for the first time in years, he didn't wake up to silence pressing on his chest like a weight. Instead, he woke to the faint rustling of paws on the floorboards. Charlie was exploring, limping carefully, still weak, but curious enough to wander. Ben sat on the edge of his bed, watching through the cracked door. The puppy's nose twitched as he sniffed along the hallway wall, pausing to glance into each room as though searching for ghosts. When he reached the living room, Charlie hesitated at the photographs on the mantel. His head tilted, ears perked, and for a strange moment, Ben wondered if the dog somehow recognized the faces in the frames. Ben followed quietly, leaning against the doorframe. That's Emily, he whispered, his voice dry. He hadn't said his daughter's name aloud in months. She would have liked you. Charlie blinked up at him, tail giving a faint thump on the floor. The simplicity of that look made something crack deep inside Ben. He hadn't realized how starved he was for connection until now, how desperate he was for a soul that didn't expect him to explain, only to exist alongside him. Later that day, Ben made a decision. He bundled Charlie into the truck and drove him to the small-town vet. The ride was quiet, save for the puppy's soft breaths and the occasional whimper when a bump in the road jarred his still-healing body. Ben kept one hand steady on the wheel and the other near the puppy's side, as if his presence alone could keep him anchored. The vet, a woman named Dr. Harris, gasped when she saw Charlie. My God, Ben, where did you find him? At my porch. Crawled right up and collapsed. She knelt down, stroking Charlie's head gently, examining his scars, the sharp ridges of bone under fur. Who could do this to a creature? She muttered, half to herself. Ben didn't answer. The question rang too familiar. He knew what it was to be left behind, to feel discarded by the world. Dr. Harris ran tests, gave shots, cleaned wounds. Charlie endured it all with a trembling patience, eyes never straying far from Ben. Each time the needle pricked or the cold stethoscope pressed, Charlie's gaze found his rescuer, as if to ask, You won't leave, will you? Ben stayed. When they left the clinic, Charlie was swaddled in a soft blanket, a prescription tucked under Ben's arm. He needs time, Dr. Harris said. Food, warmth, patience. But he'll make it, with the right person. The words echoed in Ben's chest like a bell. With the right person. Could he still be that? That night, as rain pattered against the roof, Ben sat by the fire with Charlie curled on his lap. He stroked the dog's fur in slow, absent-minded circles, staring at the flames. Memories stirred, the sound of Emily's laughter, the way she used to press her face into the fur of their old family dog, Max. He remembered her begging him to adopt another after Max passed. He'd said no. Too much responsibility. Too much mess. And now, here he was, holding a broken puppy that the world had already given up on. Charlie shifted in his sleep, letting out a sigh so heavy it seemed to carry the weight of all he'd endured. Ben leaned back, eyes burning. We'll get through this, he murmured, surprising himself. Both of us. The following days became a rhythm. Feedings every few hours. Small walks around the yard, Charlie stumbling but determined. Baths that left them both soaked but ended with the puppy pressing close as though forgiveness came easily. Each act of care chipped away at the ice around Ben's heart. Neighbors noticed. One afternoon, Mrs. Callahan from next door stopped at the fence. Ben, she called, surprise in her voice. Is that a puppy? Ben looked down at Charlie, who was gnawing clumsily on an old rope. Yeah. Found him the other night. Her eyes softened. Good for you. It's nice to see some life in that yard again. Life. The word struck him harder than she realized. As summer settled in, Charlie's strength returned. His fur thickened, his ribs became less prominent. He chased butterflies clumsily in the garden, barked at passing cars with surprising courage, and fell asleep sprawled across Ben's boots like he belonged nowhere else. But healing wasn't only for the dog. Bit by bit, Ben found himself drawn into the world again. He began tending the garden he had let go wild. He fixed the squeaky hinge on the front gate. He even caught himself humming once, low and tuneless, while cooking breakfast. Charlie had become a mirror, showing him not what was lost, but what could still be saved. And just when Ben thought maybe, just maybe, they were safe in this fragile new life, something happened that threatened to shatter it all. It began with the sound of a truck idling at the edge of the driveway. The days blurred into one another, each hour a test of endurance, each night a fragile prayer that the puppy would still be breathing come morning. My home no longer felt like a house. It had transformed into a sanctuary, a battlefield, and a chapel where hope and despair collided constantly. I built my entire routine around him. Feeding him through a syringe became ritual, a slow, painstaking process that demanded patience I didn't know I possessed. The puppy's jaws barely moved, but every drop of liquid nutrition he swallowed was a small victory. I celebrated silently each time his throat worked to push the mixture down, as though we had won a war no one else could see. His weakness terrified me. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I would wake up in panic and rush to his side, convinced that I would find only stillness. But there he would be, barely breathing, yes, but alive. And that tiny spark of life pushed me to go further, to keep fighting alongside him. The vet had warned me, don't get your hopes too high. He's fragile. His body is fighting years of neglect, not just a bad night. But how could I not hope? Every time his sunken eyes lifted to meet mine, something unspoken passed between us. A silent pact. He wasn't ready to give up, and neither was I. Slowly, signs of change emerged. His ribs, though still sharp, began to lose that deathly definition. His breathing steadied, no longer the frantic wheeze of lungs collapsing under strain, but the measured pull of survival. His paws twitched occasionally in sleep, as if his spirit was chasing something just out of reach. And then, the moment came. It was late afternoon, the sun casting soft orange light across the floorboards. I had just placed him on a blanket in the living room. For days, he had barely moved beyond the slow lift of his chest. But this time, as I sat nearby, his paw dragged weakly across the fabric. His head lifted, just an inch, trembling with effort, but unmistakably his own while driving it. "Good boy," I whispered, my voice cracking. "You can do it." He blinked at me, and I swear I saw a glimmer of determination flicker there. He tried again, pushing his fragile body forward, collapsing halfway, then trying once more. It wasn't graceful, but it was monumental. Inch by inch, he crawled toward me, dragging himself with nothing but sheer stubbornness. By the time he reached my knee, his whole body was trembling, his breath shallow. But he pressed his face against my leg, collapsing there as though he had achieved the impossible. Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. This wasn't just movement, it was a declaration. A puppy once thrown away like garbage had chosen to fight, to reach for warmth, to reach for me. From that day, his recovery accelerated. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't suddenly run across the room or wag his tail like nothing had happened. No, it was measured in small victories. He licked water from a bowl on his own. He managed to sit up without collapsing. He pushed his nose into my palm, seeking touch instead of recoiling from it. But with every step forward came moments of fragility. One night, he started coughing violently, his small body racked with spasms that left me helpless. I rushed him to the vet, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the carrier. The vet examined him with a grave expression. "His lungs are still weak. It's touch and go. You need to be prepared." Prepared for what? To lose him? To watch the light fade from eyes that had only just begun to shine again? I couldn't. I wouldn't. Back home, I sat beside him, stroking his frail body as he drifted in and out of sleep. I spoke to him in whispers, telling him about the world he hadn't yet discovered, the smell of fresh grass, the sound of waves at the beach, the joy of chasing leaves in autumn. "There's so much waiting for you," I murmured. "You just have to stay." And he did. By the end of the 4th week, His transformation was undeniable. His coat, once patchy and lifeless, began to show hints of shine. His frame filled out, not much, but enough that he no longer looked like a shadow of death. He could stand on wobbly legs for a few seconds, then longer and longer still. But the most miraculous change wasn't physical. It was the way he began to look at me, not with hollow resignation, but with trust. When I entered the room, his eyes followed me. When I spoke, his ears twitched as though my voice was the anchor keeping him tethered to this world. It struck me then, he wasn't just surviving. He was choosing to live. And for reasons I couldn't fully understand, he had chosen me as his reason. Still, questions haunted me in the quiet hours. Who had discarded him so cruelly? What kind of person looked into eyes like his and decided he wasn't worth keeping alive? I didn't have answers, but I had something stronger, a resolve to give him the life they had stolen. As he lay beside me one evening, his head resting on my hand, I realized something profound. Saving him wasn't just about rescuing a life. It was about reclaiming my own. For the first time in years, the emptiness in my chest felt less suffocating. There was still grief, still pain, but also a flicker of light. And it came from the fragile heartbeat of a puppy who had crawled to my door and refused to give up. Ben woke before dawn, though sleep had been shallow at best. The puppy, his puppy, though he still resisted saying it aloud, lay curled in the blanket nest at the foot of the couch. He was breathing deeply, paws twitching in dream. For a long moment, Ben simply watched. The faint rise and fall of that tiny chest was proof enough that yesterday's battles hadn't been in vain. Proof that life, however fragile, had chosen to stay a little longer. The house was quiet except for the occasional sigh of wind outside. Ben shifted, his joints stiff from sleeping in the recliner again. He hadn't been able to bring himself to leave the puppy's side through the night. There was something about the way the little dog stirred in his sleep, whimpering softly, then settling as though reassured just by Ben's presence. It felt like responsibility, yes, but it was more than that. It was connection. He rubbed his eyes, stood, and stretched. The movement woke the puppy. Groggy eyes blinked up at him. Then, almost on instinct, the puppy dragged himself forward, pressing his small body against Ben's ankle. That simple act undid something deep in his chest. No one had leaned on him like that in years. No one had needed him without condition. "Morning, champ," Ben murmured, crouching down. He ran a gentle hand over the puppy's back, tracing the line of healed ribs, the soft patch of fur where bruises had begun to fade. "We've got work to do today. Gotta show the world you're tougher than you look." The day unfolded slowly, the way healing days always did. Feeding took patience. The puppy's appetite was stronger now, but Ben still measured out the softened kibble with care. He sat on the kitchen floor while the little one ate, resisting the urge to hurry him along. Every bite felt like a victory. Every wag of that thin tail felt like sunlight forcing its way into the dark corners of Ben's life. Later, they ventured outside. The yard was damp with dew, grass shining in the early light. Ben set the puppy down gently. For a moment, the pup just stood there, uncertain, legs trembling. Then he took one wobbly step, then another. His paws pressed into the earth as though rediscovering what it meant to belong to it. When he stumbled, Ben's hands were there to catch him. When he managed to walk 3 whole feet without falling, Ben laughed, a sound that startled him as much as it did the puppy. He hadn't heard his own laughter in so long. Neighbors paused on their morning walks, eyes softening when they noticed the scene. A grizzled man kneeling in wet grass, coaxing life back into a broken creature. Some offered words of encouragement, others just smiled knowingly. Ben, usually so guarded, didn't flinch at their attention. He was too focused on the puppy, on each step that seemed to carve away another layer of loneliness from his heart. Inside, Ben began small routines. Towels laid out near the door for muddy paws. A water bowl that caught the sunlight on the counter before being placed carefully on the floor. The quiet shuffle of rearranged furniture so the puppy could explore safely. Every adjustment felt permanent, though Ben refused to name it. He told himself it was temporary, just until the puppy was stronger. Yet his actions betrayed him. His house, long silent, long empty, was shifting around this fragile heartbeat. That afternoon, they sat together on the porch. Ben cradled a mug of coffee, steam curling into the crisp air. The puppy dozed in his lap, head heavy against his thigh. Birds chattered in the distance, but Ben only heard the slow rhythm of breathing beneath his hand. He thought about the road that had led here, the cruelty that had dumped this creature like trash, the night of fear and collapse at his door, the vet's uncertain words. And he thought about the quiet miracle of survival that had followed. "You showed up when I didn't even know I needed you," Ben whispered, voice breaking despite himself. His thumb traced the pup's ear, soft and warm. "Guess we're both learning how to live again, huh?" The puppy stirred, eyes fluttering open, as if in answer. And in that gaze, Ben didn't just see gratitude. He saw something fiercer, trust. Absolute, unshakable trust. That night, as the puppy curled closer against him than ever before, Ben finally allowed himself to admit what had been growing inside him since the moment those weak paws scratched at his door. This wasn't just rescue. This was something deeper. Something that had bound two broken souls together in ways neither of them could have predicted. For the first time in years, Ben felt that he wasn't alone in the world. Spring returned with a tenderness that felt like a gift. The frost melted from the edges of the windows, the ground softened under new grass, and life seemed to breathe again through every open field. I watched from my porch as Charlie bounded into the yard, his coat gleaming in the sunlight, his legs carrying him farther and faster than I once thought they ever could. He had grown strong, but not just in body. His spirit, once fractured, once hidden behind the weight of betrayal, now shone in every step, every bark, every joyful glance back at me. It was hard to believe that only months ago he had crawled to my door like a shadow of himself, broken and discarded. Now he raced through open spaces as though he had been born for nothing less than freedom. Every time I saw him run, I felt something inside me heal too, an old scar, invisible to others, but deep within me. One morning, while walking along the quiet country road that bordered my land, Charlie suddenly stopped. His ears pricked, and he stared at the ditch with unusual focus. I followed his gaze, my chest tightening, remembering too well the night he had been left like trash. And then I saw it, another small figure trembling in the weeds. It was a puppy. Skinny, eyes wide with the same terror I once saw in Charlie. Charlie didn't rush forward. He crouched low, tail wagging softly, emitting a low, reassuring whine. The puppy, hesitant at first, inched toward him. I stood frozen, my heart breaking and mending all at once as I realized the circle had turned. What had been given to Charlie, he was now offering to another: patience, safety, love. I knelt down slowly, speaking in the same soft tone I had used with Charlie the night he collapsed at my door. "It's okay. You're safe now." The puppy, trembling, pressed against Charlie's chest. And in that moment, I knew Charlie wasn't just surviving anymore. He was teaching, leading, giving back the grace that had saved him. Bringing the new pup home felt like repeating a sacred ritual. I laid down blankets, offered food, and watched as Charlie nudged the puppy closer to the bowl, then sat back as though guarding him. There was pride in his eyes, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. As weeks passed, I saw something even more beautiful unfold. The puppy began to mirror Charlie, learning trust, learning joy, learning that humans could mean safety instead of harm. And I saw myself reflected too, in ways I hadn't expected. Where I once carried the silence of loneliness, I now carried the noise of paws on hardwood, the warmth of two steady companions by my side. But the most profound moment came one quiet evening. I sat on the porch with Charlie leaning against my leg and the little one asleep in my lap. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and rose. Charlie lifted his head, looked straight into my eyes, and for the first time since I had met him, I felt a complete conversation in his gaze. He wasn't saying, "Thank you," anymore. No, he was telling me, "We're home." Tears welled in my eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of it all. This dog, once left for dead, had not only healed, but had given me a reason to keep healing too. Together, we had turned abandonment into belonging, pain into purpose. And as the stars began to scatter across the night, I whispered a vow I knew he already understood. As long as I live, you'll never be left behind again. Charlie pressed his nose into my palm, his heartbeat steady against mine. The little pup stirred, sighed, and curled closer. And in that stillness, beneath the endless sky, we were more than just survivors. We were family.